So, think. What do we mean by think? There are acres written on this word, absolute acres of stuff. And thought and thinking are mental forms and processes respectively. Thought is both. Right. This I thought was better and more definitive in the context of the machines. So it allows a being to model the world and deal with it effectively according to their plans, objectives, ends and desires. And so the beings might not be out of organic matter, they may be out of inorganic matter, they may not be evolved, they may be built. So let's have a look. Not think. If you stick a pin in your finger, do you think about it and shout, ouch? Or if you put your hand in a flame, do you think about it and withdraw it? Or is it a reflex action? It is a reflex action. If you had to think about it, you would suffer skin damage, and all of the extremities of the body are apt to be responsive to things in that way. One of the reasons is it takes about 50 milliseconds if you stick a pin in your finger for the message to get to the brain. You then need about another 100 milliseconds for the brain to process it before you shout ouch and move. So that's far too long a time period for a hot flame or a sharp object. So as soon as you feel something, you move. So it turns out a lot of animals, insects, are reflex driven as opposed to thinking driven. Their behavior looks as though they're thinking, but actually when you analyze it, it's just reflective. So is a reflex thinking? Well, perhaps, perhaps not. But ants react, organize, cooperate, and plan ahead. There is a hierarchy that's evident. They have a community basis, they have individual brains. The brains, depending on the species, an English garden ant's got about 200 neurons, a Patagonian ant's got about 2,000. So they've got less processing power than my laptop over there by a long way. So as a society, you would say they're fairly deep thinking. They're able to organize things like heating vents or cooling vents in hives, and are very skilled. And they're quite happy to sacrifice bodies for the good of the society. But how much of it is deep thought? How much is it just programming? It turns out that we can build ant colonies, we can program them, and we can get them to do pretty much what real ants do, and we can build them. So that's a kind of interesting line. Jellyfish and slime molds, these are cellular-based animals. They react, they organize, they cooperate, they plan ahead. Do they? I don't know. They look like they do. If you watch a jellyfish, they do swim around. They're attracted to things, but there's no hierarchy evident. They are community basis. There's no individual brains. They sacrifice to survive. The whole is greater than the individual, react and think. But what is interesting, if you take a knife and cut them in half, they become two jellyfish or two communities of slime mold. So slime mold has the ability to glump across the forest floor, find some food. It will then break up to devour the food, then come back together as a community and move off, almost like a foot, if you like, across the forest floor. Very strange behavior. And again, we can actually build machines with that kind of capability. So the questions, do our machines exhibit these properties today? I think they do. They have those kinds of reactive and, if you like, almost seminal essences of thinking. So do they think? Are they intelligent? Are they alive? Partially. I now hit a bit of a problem, and the difficulty is this. We have such a limited view of life that should a new life form be created, we might not be smart enough to recognize that it is a life form. Because our experience so far has been carbon-based. It's been with things that evolve and are born and live and die and hunt and do all those things. So a life form living inside a machine might not be something that we recognize as being alive. So here are a bunch of words that we use every day. We do not have an adequate description. There's no definition for these words that actually lay out quite precisely what we mean by life and intelligence and complexity and scalability. And for the engineers in the audience, scalability means that you've not pushed the system far enough to see it break yet. Complexity is another one. We use the word, but we don't have a measure. So for none of these words do we have a measure. We've got no quantification whatsoever, which makes it almost futile to have a discussion. It's almost like saying, I believe in God, you don't, and I'm right and you're wrong, and it gets down to that kind of level. It becomes a nonsensical discussion. So on a scientific basis, you can go no further. So in face of these human limitations, we ought to keep an open mind.